Hi, this short clip is part of a series of primers released by Pugatch Consilium. The goal is to provide you with a checklist to conduct biopharma business in China. What are the key pillars that need to be understood? We hope these videos allow you to better grasp your corporate and patient journey in China. Today, we discuss the regulatory pathway from clinical trial applications to drug marketing authorization. Before we begin, make sure you're ready for the regulatory process. If you don't have a branch registered domestically, a domestic legal agent is required during the marketing authorization process. Ensure your drug is approved and you are the marketing authorization holder. Respect provisions on human genetic resources, which we will explore in a later video. Align with ethical and GXP standards, and put in place independent quality control within your organization. Since 2015, China has significantly overhauled its clinical trial application process. CTAs, reviewed and examined by the CDE, are necessary to begin Phase 1 clinical trials when sufficient preclinical data has been gathered. The process begins with pre-submission meetings with CDE experts in order to discuss general matters and trial design. The CTA should be filed on the CDE's website in eCTD format, which is mandatory for all regulatory submissions in China. Note that overseas data can now be used in the CTA process, provided it was generated in compliance with Chinese GCP standards, data integrity is preserved, and you can prove ethnic consistency between overseas and domestic populations. The application process for clinical trials should last under 60 working days, with tacit approval if the CDE doesn't issue a negative opinion or additional questions within this time frame. In 2025, China introduced a fast track for CTAs to favor the development of innovative drugs. To qualify, your drug must be a Class 1 innovative drug, in other words, a global first, and belong in a specific priority bucket. Either it provides significant clinical value, is a pediatric or orphan drug, or belongs to a globally synchronized R&D project. Prerequisites for this fast track include having completed the mandatory ethics review and developing a risk management strategy. The application process for the fast track is simple and involves ticking the corresponding box during the CTA process and providing proof of eligibility. Qualifying for this fast track reduces the approval timeline from 60 to 30 working days. Note that clinical trials must start within 12 weeks of CTA approval, failure of which can disqualify you from benefiting from the accelerated approval process in the future. Once clinical trials are complete and you have collected sufficient data, you may file a marketing authorization application with the NMPA. The process begins once again with a pre-submission meeting with the CDE, which is responsible for scientific evaluation of the application. Once the application is submitted on the CDE's website in the appropriate format, the CDE has 200 working days to carry out the technical review. This clock stops if the CDE issues a deficiency letter. In parallel to the technical review, you should carry out all sample testing and inspections with the relevant agencies. Once the marketing authorization application is approved, you receive a drug registration certificate. 4 green channels are in place to accelerate the approval timeline, of which 3 mainly apply in your corporate journey. First, Breakthrough Therapy designation aims to speed up drug approval for innovative or modified new drugs for the prevention and treatment of life-threatening diseases or diseases seriously affecting the quality of life of patients, where no therapy exists and preliminary clinical data shows the drug is safe, or where the drug presents significant clinical superiority over existing therapies supported by preliminary clinical evidence. You should apply for this designation on the CDE's website during Phase 1 and 2 trials, or the commencement of Phase 3 trials at the latest. The CDE has 45 working days to review the application, and final approval is subject to a 5-day publicity period. Having your drug designated as a breakthrough therapy unlocks much closer guidance by the CDE throughout the clinical stage, rolling submissions of clinical data, and automatic eligibility for priority review of the marketing authorization application. Second, you can also apply for conditional approval of your drug during the clinical stage. This applies to drugs used to treat life-threatening diseases for which no treatment exists, and drugs urgently needed for public health, where efficacy is demonstrated by early clinical data and clinical benefit can be predicted by surrogate endpoints. The validity of early clinical data and selected surrogate endpoints should be discussed with CDE experts during pre-submission meetings to reach consensus before filing. Also, make sure that confirmatory trials are designed and the first patient enrolled before submitting the conditional approval application, which occurs simultaneously with the marketing authorization application. Securing the conditional approval procedure for your drug allows for quicker market entry by deferring Phase 3 clinical trials and qualifies it for priority review of the marketing authorization application. Third, the priority review and approval channel can be applied for simultaneously with the marketing authorization application for certain categories of drugs treating major infectious or rare diseases, new pediatric drugs, innovative or urgently needed vaccines, and drugs having qualified for other green channels. As with other accelerated procedures, ensure your drug is eligible in pre-submission discussions with CDE experts. The priority review process shortens the technical review timeline to 130 working days with an ultra-fast clock of 70 days in specific circumstances, and also grants priority for other procedures such as testing and inspections. Finally, since January of this year, Chinese regulatory authorities have improved the process to accelerate domestic approval of certain drugs already marketed overseas facing urgent clinical needs in China. Moving away from a list-based system, you can now apply for this process by convincing CDE experts of the existence of urgent clinical need during pre-submission meetings. These meetings are also the appropriate forum to discuss the admissibility of international clinical data and matters related to priority review. The CDE must review clinical trial applications under this procedure under 30 working days. Alternatively, regulatory authorities may grant a full clinical trial waiver if the data you submit is appropriate, effectively bypassing the need for domestic phase 3 trials. This is especially the case where the data submitted includes MRCTs conducted in China or where you prove ethnic consistency between overseas and Chinese populations. Once you apply for drug approval, your application can and often will benefit from priority review. This procedure also compresses timelines for sample testing and inspections. Wrapping up, the regulatory system in China has been significantly overhauled in the last decade. From a slow regulatory process focused on generics, it has evolved into an internationally competitive system which favors innovative drugs and drugs addressing urgent clinical needs through accelerated pathways and increased collaboration with regulators. Make sure you leverage this opportunity. Thanks for following this series.